Hello self-love pioneers. Today I'm talking about confrontation. It is a word that makes a lot of us feel a bit sick in the pits of our stomachs. It's a word that is usually associated with negativity, with hostility, with general all-round yuckiness. But to me, when I think about the word confrontation, I definitely can see from my perspective that sometimes confrontation is necessary in relationships, and that the word confrontation to me just really means when you confront something with somebody or with a group of people. Sometimes in our friendships, in our partnerships, in our situations in work, in our creative endeavours, in our connections with other humans, other folk on the planet, we do need to confront stuff. There is stuff that needs to be aired out. There is stuff we do need to look at face to face. We need to talk about things sometimes. Occasionally things do get awkward or uncertain or weird or nasty, and we need to confront it in order to sort it out. So how can we do that in a self-loving way? How can we make sure that we are moving into confrontation in a self-loving way and making sure that we are removing ourselves from confrontation which has become toxic or unproductive? I think that's the main thing I really want to talk about in the context of this video today. So hopefully this will be helpful to those among you who do have a difficult time with the word conflict. You've had a nasty past when it comes to conflict, and you're wondering how you can actually approach things in a relationship that haven't really gone down well, that do need to be sorted out and do need to be talked through, but in a way that is healthy and self-loving. We occasionally find ourselves needing to talk through something that's gone on in one of our relationships so that it isn't swept under the rug and it isn't allowed to continue happening, and so that both people actually have a really good sense of what went on and why it happened, so that you can move forward in a more progressive, positive way from that point on. So that's what I mean by confrontation actually being healthy and being necessary and being actually a key part of human relationships much of the time. But I think we can have a very clear idea in our minds of what a healthy confrontation is and what that entails, versus when a confrontation has gone really sour and it's not really working for either party. I have not been bashful about the fact that when I was younger, I was not very good at confrontation. I was extremely hostile. I was very aggressive. I was bordering on violent at times when I was younger. I really just wasn't very good at having a healthy, productive confrontation style. I know there are a lot of people that find themselves in that situation where they don't deal very well with conflict and they get really defensive or they get really angry and domineering, and they would like to change that. I also know in the other direction that there are a lot of people in my audience who find that they don't feel like they have the right to remove themselves from somebody who's being like that, and they tend to find that they really clam up during conflict situations. They become very passive, very subdued, and actually normally they ended up being shouted down or they can't get their point across. So I kind of feel like I want to put maybe some insights for both parties in this particular video. So I'll begin by talking about what a healthy confrontation looks like. I think everybody's mileage varies. You might have different ideas, but for me, a confrontation with somebody should be productive. It should be intended to find a solution to a problem or to reach an understanding which is not there when the confrontation scenario begins. So it's really productive. It's moving us towards a greater understanding or towards some kind of an agreement that we both can follow from then on. When I know that there's something that I need to confront in a relationship with someone that I love, I always begin by offering something positive about the relationship. I always start by saying, I love you, I love this connection, that's why I want to have this discussion with you, because I want you to understand my side and I want to understand your side so we can move forward positively together. And the other thing that I think is really important when we begin a confrontation is that we both know what we're walking into. So I don't think it's very appropriate or healthy for somebody to begin confronting someone without any prior warning. For me, if I wanted to get into a confrontation discussion with somebody where I wanted to address something that maybe I wasn't happy about or maybe I was upset with, I would definitely arrange a time for that discussion to take place, and I would be very clear about the fact that I wanted to talk about something particular that I wasn't happy with or that I wanted to kind of clear the air, so that the other person doesn't feel like they're caught off guard and the other person has a chance to emotionally prepare for the fact that this might be a little bit more of a heavier discussion than we normally would have together. So there's that sense of respecting somebody enough and respecting their time time enough to be clear about what you want from the conversation, rather than, you know, catching somebody off guard, shocking them, maybe trying to be needlessly provocative by bringing it up in the midst of another conversation which has got nothing to do with the confrontation. I think it's really unhealthy to do that, so I try never to do that. Obviously, a healthy confrontation situation should be one that doesn't involve any violence and doesn't involve any allusions to violence. A healthy conflict situation is one in which both parties get a chance to talk. So it's not just one person going on this massive rant and presenting this impenetrable wall of sound while the other person just takes it and absorbs it and doesn't get a chance to say anything back. There should definitely, without any doubt, be room for both people's emotions to be expressed and grievances to be aired. But like I said at the beginning, I think generally a conflict situation, if it's healthy, is going to be one that is constructive rather than destructive. So air out your emotions, talk about how you both feel about the situation, but then of course quickly move on to what can we learn from this, how can we construct something useful from this, how can we both make an agreement on something so that this doesn't happen going forward, or how can we kind of confirm that we have gotten to understand each other better as a result of confronting this. To me, that's what would be healthy. And if that doesn't happen the first time around when you're dealing with a confrontation about something, then I think you have a chance to make it happen a second time around. It doesn't have to be we have one chance to get this right, and if one of us gets too upset or walks away or there's a misunderstanding, that's it, that's the end of our connection. You know, we can have a chance to breathe and come back to the discussion at a later date when we both feel like we've kind of cooled off and we can come at it from a more objective place. So I think that's another thing about what makes a confrontation scenario healthy, is that you both recognise that if it doesn't go quite right, if it rises a bit wonky in the oven, then you can try again. There's always the opportunity, if you both care about each other and care about the connection, to have the discussion over. Another thing that I would personally say makes a confrontation scenario healthy is talking face to face where possible, or on the phone or on Skype, rather than actually via text or WhatsApp or something like that, because I think that a lot of nuance and a lot of tone and a lot of intonation can be missed when we do things via text or via written word, whereas if we can actually look at each other or at least hear each other's voices, there is the greater chance that we're going to be understood rather than taking things wrongly. So I feel like that is important for me where I can get that. And also I think that a healthy confrontation scenario normally takes place in a neutral space. For example, if a friend of yours wanted you to come over to their house to talk about some stuff that you had done or said that they were upset with, I don't think it would be a million miles away from unfair for you to suggest that you instead meet somewhere neutral, like a cafe or a coffee house or a park or something like that, because I think that there's a lot of energies and a lot of associations and a lot of power that is wielded for that person who actually is in possession of the home. So when you walk into somebody else's personal private space to have a conversation about difficult feelings you're having towards each other, that person whose private space it is immediately going to have the upper hand conversationally, because they're more comfortable, everything is theirs, it's their space. So for me, I always like to have confrontation scenarios happen in a neutral space, and I think that means that we both are checking our behaviour as well, and checking the tone of our voices and how we are coming across, because we're in that public scenario. But I also feel like the energy is neutral, and I think that's fair. So for me, that also is part of what it means to have a healthy confrontation scenario. Now, your mileage is going to vary on all of these things that I've just listed. So what I would definitely suggest as an act of self-love for you is that you think about what healthy confrontation means to you. Now, for a lot of people, a healthy confrontation scenario in which both people are being self-loving is a scenario where no raising of voices occurs, no shouting, and that's very important to a lot of people. Now, that's not actually admittedly as important to me. I'm not necessarily hugely affected by somebody raising their voice to me. I know that I can be quite like histrionic and I get shouty. I get shouty just when I'm complaining about something in general. My voice will have a tendency to rise. So even though in a conflict situation I have certainly learned not to raise my voice as much as I ever did when I was younger, I definitely don't take it personally. So for me, it's not really a deal breaker that somebody doesn't raise their voice to me, but for a lot of people that's a really important part of what healthy confrontation is about. They do not want to be shouted at, they don't want to be screamed at, they don't want someone raising their voice, and that's really important for a lot of people. So if that is part of what it means for you to have a self-loving confrontation with someone, then by all means you put that in your list of what it means for a confrontation to be healthy and self-loving. And once that is on your list, then what that really means is that when you're in a confrontation with somebody in the future and they start to raise their voice and get really, you know, yelly and shouty, you have the right to say, look, I want to have this discussion with you. I really can't handle shouting, and it really detracts from what I think we're trying to do here. And if that person continues to shout and scream and bellow and raise their voice, then you have every right to say, you know what, this is not self-loving for me. I need to back away until you can talk to me in the way I've asked you to talk to me. So if you know that you're holding space for that person to talk to you, but they're not doing it in a way that is actually okay with you, then the self-loving thing to do is to raise that boundary and know that that's okay. So that is what it's for. That's what the list of pointers for healthy confrontation is for. It's so that when you are in a confrontation scenario and you realize it's become unhealthy and unself-loving to be there, you can actually walk away if you need to. You can decide enough is enough and this is not healthy for me. I would be really interested to know down below what you think constitutes healthy confrontation and what kind of deal breakers have you got for confrontation. So think about some of the suggestions that I've made from my list. Think about anything that you would want to put on your list. What is it that makes a confrontation scenario healthy and productive? And when is it okay to step away from a confrontation scenario that has gone all shades of fucked up, that does not feel good for you? There's so much that I want to say about self-loving confrontation and being able to be in that confrontation scenario with somebody, but not leaving your commitment to self-love at the door. So I'm just going to start at the top with so much more I could say. Honestly, I could do a workshop on this, guys. A 3-day workshop. Fuck. So one thing I really want to make sure I put in this video is that if you know that you are bad at confrontation, if you know that you do not behave as the best version of yourself when confrontation is happening, then it is a self-loving act for you to own that and make those changes. That is very important. For me, as I've said earlier in the video, confrontation was not my fucking strong point. I was very icky around criticism. I took it very badly. I struggled to let people speak their piece. I talked over, I shouted, I was domineering in confrontation, you know, all of those kinds of things. So I had to go on this journey of self-discovery and self-honesty. And I had to say, you know what, just because I'm in a confrontation scenario with somebody doesn't mean that I have to be confrontational. I don't have to be hostile. I don't have to be destructive. And it was a self-loving journey that I had to go on to recognize that I needed to change that about myself. Likewise, if you know that there is somebody in your life with whom you often have a toxic style of confrontation, somebody who wants to bring you into a confrontation scenario a lot of the time, maybe more than you think is necessary, or somebody who always has to conduct confrontation on their terms, then it is self-loving for you to start to really engage with your deal breakers and your no compromise zones when it comes to confrontation, and know that you can have things a little bit more on your terms. You don't have to always kowtow to what they want every time. If you're coming up against aggression, illusions of violence or actual violence, if you're coming up against a wall of sound, if you are always forced to submit to somebody else's will or terms without even getting to speak your own piece, then it is not self-loving for you to continue to engage with that person on their terms when it comes to confrontation. You have to be able to say, look, we're not going to do it this way anymore. It's not healthy for me. I don't like the way you deal with me when you're trying to confront me about something. And so that's really the self-loving journey that you need to go on, is recognizing that you can only take responsibility for the way that you behave in confrontation. Other people's behaviors are their responsibility. And if they won't check their behaviors and if they won't make those necessary changes so that confrontation feels healthier and safer for you with them, then you have every right to put those boundaries up. You have every right to decide no more. One of the key things that can be very difficult for people about confrontation is that it usually involves some kind of criticism of a person's behaviour. It might be that somebody is confronting you about something that you did or said or didn't do or didn't say, and you might really take that criticism to heart. You might take it really personally, and instead of listening to it and holding space for how the other person feels, you might choose to become very aggressive or very defensive or shut the conversation down. On the other hand, if you're the person that begins the confrontation scenario and says, hey, you know, there's some things that I want to talk to you about with regard to your behaviour, you still can't really be sure that that person isn't going to fire back with some criticisms that they have about you. There is still a possibility that they're going to fire back at you with some stuff that they're not happy about with regard to your behaviour. So there's still a risk that you might get really defensive or aggressive because you can't handle the idea of your behaviour being criticised. It's a very self-loving thing to be able to take some constructive criticism on the nose and realise that it doesn't make you any less worthy. It doesn't even make you any less loved. It's part of adult connection. If you really struggle to listen to somebody telling you that your behaviour was not okay by them, or that they feel that you could have said something differently to the way that you did, or that they weren't necessarily happy with your decision in a certain circumstance, then it might be really useful for you to do some inner work around that. Think about the lessons that you learned about criticism when you were growing up. Consider how you saw adults behaving when their behaviour was criticised, and consider whether or not you've actually taken that same habit on of not being able to really absorb criticism and sit with it. One conclusion that I've really come to in my adult life is that there is a massive difference between somebody being needlessly criticising and nitpicking and trying to make you feel bad about yourself, and then people just giving you their constructive observations and saying, look, I really feel like things could have gone better if you'd have done it like this. Maybe think about that for next time. In my 20s, I went through a lot of different experiences which really led me to this understanding that I want people that are close to me to be able to tell me when they felt like something that I did or said or something that I decided upon had a negative impact on them, and they want to be able to talk to me about it. I want people in my life to feel like they can talk to me about those things. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to agree with them at the end of the day and that I'm always going to say, yeah, okay, I can see where I was wrong there. I'm obviously going to put it through the filter of my critical thought, and if I feel like I didn't do something wrong, and if I feel like it is on the other person to work through it, then I will respectfully say so. But I always want someone in my life to be able to say, hey, you know what you did there, it hurt. And I feel like that's part, for me, of being a healthy adult with healthy functional relationships, is to recognise that being criticised, having my behaviour constructively criticised, or having somebody pull me up on something doesn't mean that they don't love me, and it doesn't mean that I'm any less worthy. Took me so long to learn that lesson. It's a good lesson, it's a good one to learn. Even if you've made a mistake, even if you've disappointed someone, even if somebody else feels let down by the decision that you made or the action that you took, you are still worthy. And it doesn't mean that the connection has to come to an end just because somebody has tried to pull you up on something or tell you that they didn't agree with something. Nor does it mean that you necessarily are obligated to agree with them and see things from their perspective. But having that conversation that happens in this mature way where you both can look at the situation and say, okay, I can see where you're coming from, let me explain where I was coming from, okay, an understanding has been reached and we're both the better for it. That is self-loving. That's self-loving on both sides. I think really what I've learned about confrontation is that if both people are coming at it in a self-loving way, it works, it's good, it's healthy, it's like manure for the friendship. You can till it into that soil and loveliness will spring from it. I think it's appropriate to call it manure because confrontation definitely is a bit shitty. It definitely doesn't smell too good, but if it goes well and both people approach it self-lovingly, it can be great. It can be great for the soil, for the earth of your friendship, you know, wonderful things can bloom. Likewise, in the opposite direction, know that somebody who loves you, somebody who says that they love you, really should be okay with hearing you out. They really should be able to listen to what you have to say and listen to your concerns. Being shut down when you feel like you do have a legitimate grievance and all you want to do is discuss it to ensure that you're both on the same page and it doesn't happen again, or at least that you have fostered an understanding around it, is really painful when you've invested a lot into a friendship or relationship and you just feel like the other person has gone, you know what, if you've got any criticism for me, then fuck it, I'm putting the wall up. That can be really painful, for sure. I have gone through times in my life where I was not yet ready to listen to criticisms that someone had about me. I wasn't ready to accept that people in my life could feel anything less than 100% love and adoration for me. And I learned, and I had to break myself down and build myself up, break down and build up again and again. I had to break down to break through. I had to do that shadow work. I had to recognize that I wanted relationships that existed on a deeper and more potent level than that I didn't want to just be blindly accepted and worshipped and adored and loved. I wanted to have relationships where somebody could say, I love you, honeybee, but I feel like you fucked up there and I want to talk about it. I want to explain why I'm upset. And I wanted to be able to hold space for people to do that. And I really want, and I really expect that people who are close to me in my life will allow me to do the same with them. That is so important. Do you have that in your relationships or in the majority of your close relationships in your life? Do you want that? Do you feel entitled to expect that and to cultivate relationships which include that? If you know that you want to get into a confrontation scenario with somebody where you want to bring up certain things that you're not happy about or that you feel negatively about, then I would definitely recommend not doing so when you're incredibly angry or incredibly upset. Make sure that you've spent some time to meditate or just to write some notes and really think about what the aim of the confrontation scenario is going to be. I really think if you want it to be constructive and you're aiming for it to be constructive and you're aiming for something good to come from it, then that is a really good starting point. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're all pent up, you haven't really done any processing on your own yet, and you're going to be doing all of your processing in front of the other person, usually catching them off guard and just dumping all of this crap on them that you haven't had a chance to even sort through. I would recommend taking some distance, taking some objectivity, thinking about why you want to have this confrontation with somebody and what you hope to get out of it. You can choose your words, you can think about the words that you want to make sure that you get into the conversation. As I've said time and time again on the channel, there's nothing wrong with thinking about what you want to say before you say it. There's nothing wrong with thinking about the key points that you want to hit and making sure that you do hit on those points. My main message for this video about healthy confrontation is that confrontation that occurs in a self-loving way is really about giving and getting respect while you work through something. It can be hard, it can definitely be sticky, it can definitely be yucky, it can definitely be shadowy in a confrontation scenario. But really what's important is that you feel respected, the other person is respected, and together you are working through something. There is a point to it, it is a process, it is effort on both sides to get somewhere that is better and deeper and more fulfilling, where an understanding has been reached, where an agreement has been made, or both of those things. Take some time to think about the confrontation scenarios that have gone on over the last few years of your life. Think about times where you did feel respected and where you felt like your voice was being heard in the confrontation and where you offered respect and space in return. Think about what came out of that, and also think about times where you didn't feel respected in a confrontation scenario and you maybe didn't give respect in return. Think about the spectrum of possibilities for confrontation, and also don't forget to think about those deal breakers. What are those no compromise zones when it comes to healthy confrontation? When has a confrontation scenario just become toxic? When is it okay to put your barrier up or walk away? I really hope these insights have been useful and interesting, and I can't wait to read the comments on this one. It's a really interesting topic for me. It's something that, like I said at the beginning, I have a lot more to say on. It's something that I've really dug deep with, this particular one, because it's very much to do with my shadows and the work that I've done on myself. So I hope these insights have been a good starting point anyway. Much love and self-love, baby cakes. Blessed be. Oh, I found an altar space. Just set up here.